Welcome back to another true crime episode of Shades of Evil video blog. So let's jump onto the case of another monster, and like me, don't be surprised if you find your jaw dropping every now and then. There is a debate about the reform of a pedophile that just goes round and round. Certain psychologists believe that it's possible to teach child molesters skills and self-control not to abuse a child, but personally I don't believe that urge or that need to do the despicable and to ruin a child forever is something you can ever, no matter how much you try, eliminate from that person's psyche. It's a personal belief, and if you disagree, feel free to voice your feelings on the socials, but how are you supposed to get the impulse of a sex offender, especially those who have an attraction to children, out of them? It's not a tangible thing you can remove, unless you want to go medieval and castrate the person. But removing the sex organ does not necessarily remove the primal call a pervert feels to desecrate and destroy the life of another for his or her own temporary pleasure. Chemical castration requires monitoring, and many of the methods used have side effects. So what is the solution? Sex offenders are obviously aware that they are at the bottom of the food chain in prisons, still they commit their crimes again and again. The threat of appearing on a sex offender register also seems to be not a huge deterrent, and the fact that it restricts them from living where they want to live, once released, also does not stop someone from committing the most degrading of crimes. In the first world, like the USA, Sweden, and other economically and socially stable countries, it's easier to control the scourge of sex offenses, but what about those who live in the third world? In today's episode, we will be covering the case of someone so despicable that it might change your mind, even if you are a staunch supporter against the death penalty. What makes the crimes even more unimaginable is the fact that he had victim counts to the 100th child. It's almost incomprehensible, but this killer and his accomplices had two things in common. They chose children as their victims, and they had absolutely no remorse. There are over 1.5 million street children in Pakistan today. The causes for this are many and varied. Domestic violence, abuse, and poverty are the most common reasons. Some children run away from home just to find food, only to end up having to steal for survival. Many are orphaned with no relatives to take care of them. There are an estimated 3,500 to 5,000 street children living on the streets of Lahore, Pakistan. A disproportionate number of these children use drugs and engage in survival sex as coping mechanisms. Since August 2003, Project Smile provides mobile social and health services to street children 6 days a week in selected neighborhoods. The following study utilizes data from Project Smile registration information on the program's initial clients. The study aimed to compare current, former, and non-drug users regarding their reasons for living on the streets, survival and coping mechanisms, and reasons for drug initiation where applicable. Of the total sample, 17% reported never having used drugs, 15.9% reported being former drug users, and 67.1% reported having used drugs in the month before registration. Participants were 96% boys with a median age of 13 years. The median length of living on the streets was 18 months, and 52.7% had even been arrested by the police. Odd jobs, begging, and pickpocketing were the primary sources of reported income. 48% reported ever having engaging in transactional sex, and 40% reported cutting themselves, primarily to cope with their anger. Although there is no official report of sexual exploitation of children by international tourists, prostitution of boys takes place at pilgrim and local tourist shrines. Pakistan serves as an origin, transit, and destination country for child trafficking, mostly of girls. Now that you have a little background about the state of child abuse, homelessness, and how disposable the life of a child is in Pakistan, you can only imagine how easy it is for pedophile predators to prey on the underaged in the country. It's the perfect hunting ground. Javed Iqbal, also known as Kikri, was born and bred in Lahore in the province of Punjab in Pakistan in 1956. His killing spree would last for a year from 1998 to 1999, which means he killed and tortured about 3 children a week. What made him one of the worst child sex abusers is that his motive and the unbelievable body count, which reached exactly 100 before he gave himself up to authorities. Another fascinating facet is the penalty the judge retendered upon him, but I am going to leave that incredible punishment for last. Let's first get to know the man, the monster, and the megalomaniac that turned the city of Lahore upside down for almost a year. As it is in most third-world countries, there is no middle class in Pakistan. Javed was fortunate enough to be born the 6th of 8 children to his parents. His father, Muhammad Ali, was a successful businessman and his mother a homemaker, and the family wanted for nothing. Javed's father was a refugee from India who had worked hard and acquired his wealth by not letting any opportunities pass him by. To say that Javed was spoiled rotten was the understatement of the year. Javed attended the government Islamic college and received a proper education as an intermediate student. In 1978, he began a recasting steel business in one of the 2 villas his father bought his son. One of the very first flags that should have raised concern was that he never had a girlfriend, yet he lived in a villa that his father had purchased for him with a group of boys. He would call the boys his boys and proudly drive around the city with the car loaded with young boys and teenagers. According to his brother, Javed was spoiled as a child and difficult to handle. He was aggressive, selfish, and used to kill animals for fun when he was a boy. He was, however, always at the top of his class and presumed to be highly intelligent. Javed never had money problems, nor did he have problems with the law, because his father would pay for everything, including getting his son out of difficult situations. When the steel casting business failed, his father would bankroll another of Javed's business ventures. It was also hardly a secret that the boys that always accompanied Javed and seemed to rotate was paid to keep him company. When anyone would criticize or ask why a grown man was jetting around the city with a bunch of underaged boys in his fancy car, he would just ban them from his home or shun them on the street. Javed would through the 80s gather boys by subscribing to teenage magazines and writing to boys, as well as sending them gifts. He also had a video game arcade, and I am sure he often gave tokens for free to have boys he found desirable play and stay. When he started the Sunnyside School for Children, it was not to get the children out of the heat and into an air-conditioned building or out of the goodness of his heart. To Javed, the end game was always sexual abuse, sodomy, and molestation. To get an idea of how easy it is to convince a child of any age to be lured into predators' clutches, keep in mind that there are almost 1.5 million street children in Pakistan alone. Children are unable to have a normal childhood, and hunger is a constant ache that is often exploited by those with means. These children, often as young as 3 years old, have no education, no protection, and for all intents and purpose, no future. It struck me that during an interview with a human rights officer, he referred to the children as nothing more than a piece of tissue paper you blow your nose on and throw away. The life of a child means little, and sadly sexual offenders who prefer their prey young have so many to pick from for so little as a piece of bread. Javed was arrested numerous times as parents laid charges of molestation, but Javed's father always had a wad of cash to ensure that his son never paid for his crimes. That was until 1990, when Mohammed died unexpectedly from a heart attack. The next time Javed was arrested for sodomy was in 1992, but this time his father's wealth and standing in the community could not save him. The police not only beat him to a pulp, but threatened to kill him and cover up his death. His mother tried her best by trying to bribe the police to let him go, but in Pakistan, a woman has not a tenth of the value a man has, and her pleas for his release were ignored. Javed was sentenced to a public thrashing, which was not only humiliating, but extremely painful. He was also sentenced to 6 months in prison, during which time he was brutally attacked and beaten that he likely had a skull fracture, would suffer from back problems and would have a limp as a result of the violence rained upon him. To Javed, the worst was that while he was in custody, his mother suffered a heart attack, and this would be the catalyst for his vengeance. He firmly believed the world had to pay with the blood of 100 boys to avenge the death of his mother, which he believed was the fault of the government. The humiliation and feeling of defeat would just fester as he blamed everyone except himself for his mother's death. It would peak in 1998, when there was an altercation between a misuse, an under-aged boy and himself, and the police were called once again. During the fight, Javed had his head kicked in and his wallet with all his rubles were stolen, but instead of charging the attackers for assault and theft, Javed was once again charged with a case of sodomy. His fury fueled his feelings of revenge, and now there were no consequences that could keep him from committing one of the worst serial murders in the history of Asia. The attack against him left him so injured he had to spend 3 weeks in hospital. None of his family members were willing to foot the bill, thus his home and his car were sold to cover his medical bills. For the first time in his life, Javed was without money. The 42-year-old sex offender still had 4 boys who were loyal to him, and when he was released from hospital, he decided to set his plan in action to rape, torture and kill exactly 100 boys. The group had to move from the luxury of a villa with a pool to a dingy 3-bedroom apartment at 11 Ravi Street, which is where so many children would be murdered. His killing spree would begin a couple of months after he was released from hospital. He would use his boys to lure children to the death chamber by promising them food or a piece of bread. Once the children were in his home, he would ask them about their lives, take a photograph, and then he and his accomplices would begin raping and killing the children. Thank you for watching Shades of Evil Vlog, Episode 5, Chapter 1. Please like, share and subscribe. Join us for Episode 5, Chapter 2 next here on my YouTube channel.